Hello, and it's 7 o'clock, and so we're going to start our meeting tonight. Welcome to our virtual soccer meeting. My name is Doug Ferguson, and along with Lana Ferguson, we are going to be your hosts tonight from Never Ends Productions. In tonight's meeting, we will be going over the NFHS rule changes. We have a special guest that's going to be presenting tonight, and I'll let Tony introduce him. For our panelists, we have Andrew Bigelow, Ben Trevino, Tony DeLois, Edgar Riviera, and Abdu Bensala. And if you are not familiar with Zoom, I know that there was an update, so people might be getting in late because once you get in, you're going to have to update before you can get in. So there might be some people that missed the beginning of this, but we are recording it, so this is going to be put up on YouTube after the fact. So so that's that. And if you're not familiar with Zoom, down at the bottom on the desktop version, phones are in different places. You'll see a chat and a question and answer button. For tonight, if you have a question and questions only, put it in the Q&A. And chat is for just normal discussions. So we have the panelists will be monitoring the questions tonight. So I will now turn it over to Tony.
Hello all, thanks for joining. Just wanted to let you know, if you're wanting to get meeting credit for this, you will go onto my IHSAA and do what you've done for the past 4 meetings that we've had. If you have any questions, Ben Trevino or myself can answer those for you, making sure that you get credit for the tournament and all of that. Without further ado, our special guest tonight, Chad Collins, will be taking over from here. Chad is a very good friend and also Kentucky SRA and Kentucky High School Athletic Association, as well as, what would you say that is, Chad? NFHS Rules Committee?
Yeah, so I'm just now finishing up, as you can see on the screen, my time as the NFHS Committee, Soccer Rules Committee chairperson. And the way we do that at the NFHS is those kind of go in 4-year terms, and just finished up my 4-year term, or sentence as I like to call it. And they've asked me to stay on as kind of an ex officio member and be what we call the historian. And that's to kind of help us keep the rules, history in line, make sure we know why some of the changes in the past have been made so that we can be tracking towards valuable resources as the game kind of develops at the high school level.
So at this point right now, guys, we're going to open it up to Chad. He's going to go through rules changes for this year. And if you do happen to have any questions, the question and answer part there, if you want to put something in there, and then we will try to get back and make it an interactive as much as possible. And if we could get Chad to maybe answer a question, depending on, and going back and forth from there. So without further ado, Chad, take it away.
Sure. Well, let me give you a little bit of background. I know Tony gave you some, because when Tony says that I'm going to answer questions, that's very questionable because by trade, I'm actually an attorney. And any good attorney knows we don't like to give answers when pressed. So my full-time job is a member of the staff here at the Kentucky High School Athletic Association. I am the general counsel. But I also serve in a capacity that would be similar to what you in Indiana would call an assistant commissioner. I am Sandy Walters. I am basically her counterpart here in Kentucky. I'm the primary sport contact in soccer as well as archery, and have been here at the association for about 10 years. It's a wonderful place to work, and doing that, we really are kind of the guardians of the high school game. And so I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about, what we are and where we come from. But in addition to my role here at the Kentucky High School Athletic Association, as Tony mentioned, I serve as the state referee administrator for U.S. Soccer for the state of Kentucky. I also am a NYSOA national referee. So me and Tony and some of the other panelists here, we've done quite a few games together. And I'm also a former high school referee and had the fortunate opportunity to do state championships in not just Kentucky, but I was also in North Dakota and Minnesota when I was in the Air Force before going to law school. So I've been around, I've seen a lot of different things, good, bad, and everything in between. And so having said that, we'll kind of get started on the rules changes that we're going to be looking at that have been implemented for the 2020-2021 school year. And but while we're doing that, what I want to talk to you about is kind of a summary of what we are, what we're coming from. First and foremost, you know, when I became a member of the Rules Committee a little over 4 years ago, I was one of those folks, one of those referees out there that was very perplexed on why we would have different rules for different levels. And there's lots of good reasons why we would, but there was also some glaring examples of why in the world would it be different restarts in this and that. For instance, at one point, if you had just a stoppage for an injury or some other unusual circumstance, it was a different restart in all three major rule bodies, including the IFAB, which USSF operates under, the NCAA rules, and then the NFHS rules. And so, you know, there's not a really good reason to have three different restarts there, except for to confuse you or to confuse the players and the coaches. And so, you know, I sought out to identify those things and try to bring some similarities and some alignment, if you will, but recognizing that there is a reason to have some of the differences. For instance, in high school, as we all know, when you receive a yellow card, you have to leave the field of play. And that is a difference that I think is well placed in the high school rules. You have to remember this is education-based athletics. And we have to continually push and remind people that the word education is first in that sentence. And folks that get this kind of out of sorts will try to make it an athletics-based education, and we don't want to do that. And so we like to remind you as officials and coaches that, you know, you are a teacher, essentially. You're an educator for these kids, and the field is an extension of the classroom. And we hope you take that role very responsible, and we hope you take it serious because, you know, this is your chance to kind of mold these young men and women as they kind of go through the game, while also getting the opportunity to be a part of the beautiful game, be a part of the game that obviously you love and have spent a lot of time to get to where you are here today. One last note is before we get started on the changes, you know, we like to remember that these rules are written, the NFHS rules are written for the varsity level. Many states utilize these rules for the different levels of play, including junior varsity as well as middle school. And you just need to make sure you're coordinating with your governing body. For the most part, that's going to be the Indiana State Association here. But make sure you're thinking about that when you're at the different levels and making sure you're following the proper levels. And that's part of doing your homework as an official. And I think we can all agree that's important. With no further ado, we'll get started on the rule changes. Our first rule change is going to come up in Rule 2-2-4, and it relates to situations where if the ball becomes deflated, and Article 4 will now state, if the ball becomes deflated during play, it's declared dead, and the game is resumed by a drop ball at the spot where it was last played. If the ball becomes deflated within the goal area, then the ball will be dropped subject to the provisions of Rules 9-2-2 and 9-2-3. If a ball becomes deflated during a penalty kick, that results in a retake. So the change here is adding the contemplation under Rule 9-2-3. And yes, for those of you that pay attention to the drop ball, yeah, we keep changing it. And last year, we finally had kind of made some changes to bring it into alignment with some other aspects of the rules. And lo and behold, our friends at other organizations decided to change it again. So the committee took a look at that and felt like we needed to again change the drop ball rule. I think these changes that are going to be implemented along with the one that we're just starting with here will bring some consistency within the rules. I think you'll find that they're going to be easy to implement because they're going to be far more consistent. And again, you know, we find a lot of frustration as referees when these kids go out in August and they're playing their club soccer in the previous summer, and then in August they start playing by these high school rules, and they're different. And again, there's nothing wrong with them being different for the right reasons. And some of these just didn't make sense to the committee, and so they've changed. The next slide in our presentation kind of illustrates this whole point. And throughout the presentation, I've taken the time to underline the critical text that kind of shows where the changes are, because a lot of times we're going to put these rule changes up and you're familiar with this format. This is from the NFHS PowerPoint that's going to be coming to you through your state association very soon, but I've kind of altered it, if you will, and added a little bit of emphasis so that you guys can kind of see exactly what the committee took a look at, what the changes were, and what they were trying to accomplish. And we'll spend a little bit of time where it makes sense in kind of trying to explain what the thought process was from my position and what I saw. And as you can see on the screen, the play pick just depicts the position where we're going to have the drop ball. Also keep in mind, the drop ball is no longer going to be done with multiple people. Last year's rule change said that the referee couldn't decide who is a part of the drop ball. And again, I said we were changing that again. Now it's going to be dropped to a member of the team who had last been in possession of the ball at the spot where it was last played. This is going to basically result in an uncontested drop ball. You know, that is going to make drop balls much more easy. I think what we see at the different levels, and I'm sure some of our panelists can ring in on this one. You know, we had some concerns with the implementation of this at other areas such as IFAB last year. It certainly was the way that we taught our kids, and that the sporting teams would work together. If you had an injury, you would have a drop ball to the team that was in last possession. Our teams, whether or not that was the rule or not, that's generally how they played themselves. With this new implementation at the IFAB level, and then we're doing it at the NFHS, sometimes we're seeing the attack go immediately. So we don't see this backpedal where the team goes back into the defensive third and then comes out. Sometimes they're hitting the ground and they're attacking immediately. So be careful and don't just presume that this is going to be the same old drop ball that you've seen in the past. The chances are that might be the case, but just know that we are seeing the attack come on quicker, faster, and more direct than in the past with these type of changes. And as referees, we want to be prepared for that. The next slide talks about the deflated ball. This is really kind of bringing in, you know, the change that was already in place. This isn't really much of a change, in other words. You know, that was already the restart, but we need to keep in mind in the taking of a penalty kick, if the ball becomes deflated, we redo the penalty kick. And obviously, we don't want to see someone get punished and lose an opportunity that was seemingly gained. The next change up is in Rule 4. Uniforms. I'm going to tell you right now, for all you guys snickering out there about uniforms, yes, there's no way that we could meet together as a committee and as a group and not change the uniform rule in some small way. It has been the bane of my existence since being a part of that committee, because for those of you that have worked a game with me, I am probably the worst guardian of this rule to begin with, because I am much more focused in on wanting to identify what a foul is and what a foul isn't, as opposed to, is this solid or is it too gray? So here's our rule change, and it's real simple. We don't care if the shirts are tucked in anymore. That is no longer part of your job. So I do take this as a good change. I'm trying to stop referees from becoming the uniform police. Let us focus in on playing the game and less focusing on uniforms. There was a time I felt differently, but that's going to be the real only change is uniforms this year. So while we couldn't get away with not having it, this is the only one, and I think it's a good one. Next. We see in Rule 4-2-7, this is dealing with the mouth guards. As you know, We previously had language in the rules that said if you were going to have a mouth guard, it had to be not be completely white and not be completely clear. The reason being here, the Sports Medicine Committee had looked at this and they wanted to make sure in the event that you had a mouth guard, it needed to be clearly visible so that if you had an injury or you had a situation, you could see what was going on and that that person had a mouth guard. There was some concerns by the Sports Medicine Advisory Committee at the NFHS that if it was white or if it was completely clear, you wouldn't necessarily be aware that they were wearing a mouth guard, and it brought some concerns. This is one of those changes that really kind of started with other sports such as football and basketball that, you know, in the case of football where they have a mandatory requirement, but in the other sports where it's discretionary, they're trying to remove these restrictions and just let the families and let the kids make this decision on their own, decide if it's best for them along with their school administrators. And so the committee decided to pull that language out. So again, less policing you have to do, and it should be easier to manage. Our next change starts talking in, and we start getting close to the drop ball and some of the things that go on there. But first, we deal with what happens when the ball hits the referee. If you're anything like myself or Tony, we often find ourselves in the middle of play because we don't run nearly as fast as we think we do, and we get in the way and get hit. And before it was sorry, my bad. Well, now if the team loses the ball in that situation, they'll get the ball back, and we do a drop ball to restart it in that regard. And you can see the three reasons why we would do that. Obviously, if a goal is scored directly, if a change of possession is occurred, or if a team gets a promising attack as a result of bounce. So again, I think this is a well-taken change. It brings it into alignment with our other folks, our brothers and sisters out there in the game. And I think it'll make it easier for the transition for not only you as referees, but the players themselves and our coaches. Because I know that our coaches are extraordinarily familiar with the rules at all times, and there's never any confusion on that. So this will kind of help us all stay on the same page. You can see here's a play pick that just kind of illustrates this situation and what happens if it hits the referee. And I do believe that is a play pick of Tony that we worked in on this this slide.
That's Tony Crush, right?
Well, I think he is on the line as well, so I'm gonna just leave it at that. So I keep talking about drop ball, and the thing that we'll see on the screen now is the drop ball rule 921. This recognizes the reasons why you would allow a restart for a drop ball. The first four have not changed. They continue to be, you know, the simultaneous kicking of the ball out, which after almost 30 years of reffing, I still have yet to see. If the ball comes deflated, which we've already talked about, a temporary suspension, that's the situation that I was talking about at the beginning, where there used to be 3 different restarts, and the same simultaneous fouls of the same degree. Those have not changed. It's the one where it touches the official that we've added this year, and I think that's a good one. Our next slide has a play pick that really kind of talks about that situation that happens 2 or 3 times a game where both teams kick the ball simultaneously and the ball goes straight out of bounds. Again, never seen this happen myself, but if you're a good referee, you always keep that in your back pocket and know that that is a safe out. Certainly, drop balls are not as big a problem in certain situations, but this is going to revert back to the team that last had a possession. So the key I think we want to think about, and when you look at this later on, is that when you have that simultaneous play, you just go back to the touch before that. Whoever possessed the ball at that point, they're going to get the drop ball in that situation. I hope I'm not moving through these too quickly. I know that it's a lot, but I want to be respectful of your all's time when we're doing these type of meetings. It's best to move through them quickly, but not too quickly. So if I am keeping an eye on the chat. So if you guys think I'm moving too quick, by all means, mention it.
Yeah, chat. Andrew and I are both looking at the chat as well, so we're kind of concentrating on that. And if something comes up, you just keep going at the same pace. I think it's going great. Agree, Andrew? Biggs?
Agreed. I've been answering some questions and clarifications just in the chat as we go. So keep on rolling, Mr. Collins.
Doing great, bud. Doing great.
I love it. So our next slide really kind of breaks down, and this is where the meat of the rule change as it relates to drop ball and Rule 9. Keep in mind some of this stuff, if we're doing true rules comparisons, and I was talking to Biggs earlier tonight, I'm working on the document right now that we have along with our sister organization, IHSAA, that does a rules comparison job. And so I am working on that document right now and putting that together along with Todd Abram, Lance Van Hotsma, and the SRA out in Northern California. So, keep in mind, the drop ball rules are in different places in different rules. You see some bleed over in Law 8, as well as in the NCAA book when it refers and cross-references this. Our stuff is going to be mainly in Rule 9. And you can see on the screen, the ball is dropped by an official from the waist level to the ground. That hasn't changed. But the referee drops the ball to one player of the team that last possessed the ball at the position where it was last touched by a player, an outside agent, or a match official. When the play was stopped, the ball was in the penalty area, or the last touch by either team was in the penalty area, the ball is dropped to the defending team's goalkeeper with all opposing players outside of the penalty area. And in all cases, all other players must remain at least 4 yards until the ball is in play. And so that 4 yards is going to be important to keep in mind. Because again, as referees, sometimes I get frustrated because we think that 10 yards means 8. So if 4 translates out, that's going to be like 2 or 3 yards. We have to get the simple stuff right. 10 yards is a right that these players are entitled to. We need to get that. Same thing is going to be here as it relates to 4 yards. So, I don't want to get too belaboring, but take the time. When you're out there on the field and you're working with your teams and your crews, and make sure you know what 4 yards is. We're on a football field, which a lot of high school games are. We have a lot of cheating references, and take advantage of those, but also be able to be a good judge of estimating that, whether it be the 10-yard or the 4-yard line distance, because that is going to be critical for getting the ball back in play. As you can see on the play pick here, it's making an emphasis on that 4 yards, and we want to make sure that we're getting that right. The next 2 slides are going to be looking at trying to illustrate the play picks as it relates to whether or not the last touch or the drop ball is going to be in the penalty area or the goal area, respectively. And in both situations, you're going to be dropping that to the goalkeeper of the defending team. And you can see the players have to be in the references or the respective points here on the screen. You can see the attackers in white and the teammate of yellow. The goalkeeper here have to be at the respective distances. The next play pick is going to be doing the same thing, but it's going to be looking at the other area as opposed, be looking at the goal area as opposed to the penalty area, and vice versa. Next, we look at Rule 13. We talk about free kicks. Again, this is one of those, fairly straightforward things that most of us that are refereeing in USSF or IFAB, this is something we've been doing for a while now, and so the transition will hopefully be fairly easy. Talks about when we're setting up for the wall and free kicks. We already talked about the 10 yards, but they need to stay 10 yards from the ball and shall remain there until the ball is in play. And that's a change. The ball is in play. And the reason why that has been changed is because when a ball is in play has been altered a little bit depending on where the kick takes. We're going to talk about what happens with free kicks that take place in the penalty area and when they're in play. And that's changed this year. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Also, this is talking about that attacking wall. We already talked about the 10 yards, but where there's a wall that's going to have 3 or more defenders in it, the attacking players can't be in that wall any longer. They have to be at least 1 yard from that wall until the ball is in play. And most of the times, the ball is going to be in play when it kicks and moves. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Here's the situation. The next 2 screens are going to be, again, talking about these when the ball is in play and how to take these free kicks. You can see in the respective references in 13.3.1, 13.3.2, or 13.3.2, in the play pick in B, the ball is going to be in play in this situation when the ball is kicked and moved. We got these players outside the area. They can attack once the ball is kicked and moved. The next play pick is going to show the exact same thing, except we're going to add a mechanism of the wall into the situation here. You can see this wall has, yes, more than 3 people, 3 or more. So these 2 players in yellow are going to have to be a minimum of 1 yard away from that wall. Again, this is going to be critical as well. We want to make sure that we are respecting the rights of everybody in this situation. Not only does the offending team or the offensive team, attacking team, we'll say, have the right to 10 yards so they can put the ball back into play, but the attackers need to be 1 yard from that wall as well. And that's going to be something, this is going to be one of those examples where you want to go out of your way to show fairness to the game and making sure that the wall is 10 yards back, but you also are going to want to make sure that you're showing respect on the flip side by making sure the attacker is not too close to that wall. It's a good chance for you to show that you're giving balance to both parties, that you're being fair, and it's going to be an opportunity for you to use your communication skills on the field. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about rule changes. And I always like to talk about this with a lot of my colleagues. It's, what is refereeing? And I know that's a very existential question, and I'm not going to go into that very far, but I'm going to tell you that the most critical aspect of refereeing is the art of communication. And you're trying to communicate your knowledge of the rules and fairness of the game in a way that you can convince all players to follow the rules. And that's simpler said than done. But just taking the times to show equal treatment on the field will go a long way. And this is another one of those examples, making sure that the teams get their 10 yards, making sure that the attacking players stay out of that wall will be critical in fair implementation and management on the field. Our next slide is going to talk about 13.3.2 and how the free kick is taken. Article 2 now states, the ball shall be kicked while stationary on the ground at the spot specified by the official. To be in play, the ball shall be moved in any direction. Failure to kick the ball shall result in a re-kick. Note that in this situation, the requirement that the ball leave the penalty area has been removed. And so that is no longer the case. And that's what we're talking about here in these situations. So that is going to do a couple different things. First and foremost, it's going to allow the ball to be put back into play. It's going to speed the game up, and it's going to allow the teams to go and move through the situation a little bit quicker. A lot of times, and this is a frustrating thing, we would see the former rule would require the ball to leave the penalty area, okay? And so when you're dealing with high-level teams, maybe this doesn't play out to be as critical. But when you've got another situation where a team's maybe not quite as skilled, especially in the youth level, we see that. How hard is it for those kids sometimes to get that ball out of the area? And what ends up happening is a free kick ends up for an offensive opportunity for the other team, which is accomplishing quite the opposite of what the rule was trying to allow with that free kick. So we don't see that as much at the high school level, but that's not necessarily going to be the case, because one of the unique aspects of high school soccer is the variety of levels of play. You know, you've got some areas where you're going to have a very high level of play, and this rule is not going to be too critical in showing a change or providing any relief to the team. You're going to have other situations where maybe the level is not quite as high, and you're going to see this a well-taken rule, and we think it helps the game. It also is one of those rules that brings us into alignment and consistency with the other rules bodies. Our next change up is Rule 13.3.4. Again, looking at the free kick. This is a new Article 4, and this is going to be a very welcome rule because it kind of makes life a little more simple. For indirect kicks, the referee shall signal an indirect kick using the NFHS signals that you can see referenced there by raising the arm above his head or her head, and this signal shall be maintained until the kick is taken and the ball touches another player or goes out of play. If, and here's the critical if the referee fails to signal the kick is indirect and the ball goes directly into the opponent's goal, the kick shall be retaken. There is no reason to punish a team that may have been paying attention to the referee and their signaling and setting up accordingly. And this is more of an equitable rule situation, and it punishes the official more than it does the teams, because if you mess this up as an official and that ball is kicked in the goal, yeah, you're going to have to go explain to the coach why you just took the ball out of the net and didn't award a goal. They didn't deserve a goal in the first place, but good luck with that conversation, because coaches always have no problem with that type of situation if they think they deserve a goal. Our next slide talks about the same concept, and it just basically does a play pick here, and you can see on the screen how the referee has signaled the proper situation in this circumstance, and that's going to be important. Our next slide looks at the penalty kick. Again, this is one of those changes where we look at the alignment of our different rules bodies, and the committee thought it was a well-taken rule. Article 3 of Rule 14 now says, or Article 3 of Rule 14-1 now states that the opposing goalkeeper shall stand with at least 1 foot on or in line with the goal line, facing the kicker between the goalposts, and shall not be touching the goalposts, the crossbar, or the nets until the ball is kicked. A lateral or forward movement is allowed, but the goalkeeper is not permitted to come off the line with both feet until the ball is in play. I got to be honest with you, the language is a little bit different if you really compare this to IFAB, and there was a lot of discussion with the committee on how we got to the rule. The bottom line is I think we're more verbose. We use more words to accomplish that. As an attorney, I love it. That's great. But it really is trying to accomplish the same thing of what we're seeing at IFAB. And number one, goalkeeper has to have at least 1 foot on the line, on the goal line, between the goalposts. Number two, that goalkeeper cannot be touching the net, the goalpost, or the crossbar. It can't be being a distraction. They need to be facing the kicker. Facing the kicker is not new, but again, they can't be touching those things. And while that portion of the rule was put in there, that's about gamesmanship. That's about the referee, or excuse me, that's about the goalkeeper delaying the restart, trying to be a distraction, trying to be the center of attention and try to freeze out the kicker. So we've got some very concise language there that allows them not to be doing those things. And then you're not allowed, the keeper's not going to be allowed to come off that line with both of his or her feet until the ball is in play. And so this is another good change. I think back to the World Cup, the Women's World Cup, where we had a shootout in the finals, and I think we can all remember how far out some of the plays were, where the goalie was basically out to the 6-yard line, and pretty darn close to it. So that's no longer possible under this rule, and this language gives us a better framework to point to in terms of saying you can't do that. And here's why, and here's it. Now, how do you judge this as a referee? Well, again, this is all about good mechanics, and this is about good mechanics working with your crew, making sure in a pregame that you guys have all talked about who is paying attention to what. And I cannot stop mentioning that enough, is so many of our mistakes as referees always come back to not being prepared, not talking about it before the game. I don't care if you've done, like me and Tony DeLois have done probably 50 games in the last few years together. I don't care. Me and Tony need to talk every game a little bit before the game and make sure we're on the same page. And these are some of the things you need to be talking about. What are you going to take as the AR And what am I going to be taking as a referee? If you're doing a two-man, you're going to have the same situation if you're running a two-man system, which is allowed by the NFHS rules, which is a little different from other rules bodies. So point to take away here is, number one, we've changed the penalty kick and what's required. We've confined the goalie and given them a little bit more of a concise list of things that they're allowed to do and things that they're not allowed to do until the ball is put back into play. Make sure you work together as a crew. Make sure you're watching the things that are important, and be prepared to deal with this. You can see the screen now is a play pick that's trying to articulate that. You can see in the micro screen, you've got the goalkeeper that does in fact have 1 foot on the line, so they're still good until the ball is put back into play. As soon as the ball is kicked and moved, that goalkeeper can come out and do the best for him or her to stop that. And I know one of the things that I don't want to spend too much time is, but the stutter step. You know, keep in mind, we clarified what was allowed in terms of stutter stepping versus stopping and going. There was a wide range of opinions across the country about what was allowed in the NFHS rules in terms of stutter stepping. And I think the rules clearly show that this is consistent with IFAB and allowed to the degree that the rule puts forward. But if the keeper stops his or her motion in the process of coming over top of the ball, that's not allowed. But they can stutter step, if you will, within the rules. And that was a rule change from a couple years ago. Our next slide talks about the goal kick in Rule 16. Again, this goes back to what I said earlier, in that we're defining when the ball is put back into play a little bit better to recognize some of the other changes. In Article 2 of 16.1, the players opposing the kicker have to remain outside of the penalty area during a goal kick until the ball is in play. And you can see in the next article, that is defined as the ball is in play when it is kicked and moved. So again, simple change. Our next slide is going to articulate that with the play pick here. You can see, again, that language that's underlined is what we're trying to focus in on. Ball is in play till it's kicked and moved, and they have to, all the defenders, the players opposing the kicker have to stay outside of that area until the ball is in play. Our next article talks about, this isn't a major change, so don't get hung up on this one, but the words that are underlined here in Article 4 of 16.1 say, after a goal kick is properly taken, the ball may be played by any player except the one who executes the goal kick. No double touch allowed, and the kicker may not play the ball until it has been touched by another player. That really is not much of a change, but the committee felt like giving this extra clarification so that we would be able to fairly implement this would be useful. So we've done that. At this point in the program, we're going to kind of move on to the editorial changes that the NFHS has put into place. And these are things that are not necessarily rule changes per se, but they do change some of the language in the rule book. And so I want you to take a look at these. And the first one we're going to start with is in Rule 12 with obstruction. Obstruction is the deliberate act of a player that moves into the path of an opponent to block, slow down, or force a change in direction when the ball is not within playing distance. Being in the way of an opponent is not an offense and is different than moving into the way. A player may legally place him or herself between opponents and the ball is provided, provided the ball is within playing distance. This player may legally be challenged from behind. So a couple takeaways. This is when we start talking about our other rules body, we're thinking about the concept of impeding. This language, the obstruction, the term obstruction has largely been removed in other areas and other rules bodies, but we still have it in the Federation laws or Federation rules, and it really is not that different of a concept. I'll leave it to some of our panelists if they want to get into a detailed discussion is trying to parse through and talk about the differences there. I struggle to see it, but there's a couple key things that continue to be a main focus in this rule. Number one, the ball has to be within playing distance. And number two, you can legally challenge from behind, but you still have to do it safely. Don't let this be a license to think that you can make an unsafe or an unskilled challenge from behind, because that's another problem within the rules that's never allowed. So don't let that language that says can legally be challenged from behind distract you from what the concept is here. Our next screen is going to show that editorial change, and it's going to be looking at the concept of challenging from behind, as well as what obstruction would look like in that regard. We added some new play situations. So keep in mind that the playing situations within our rules are basically rulings that show or try to exemplify or show examples of the rules and rulings so that you can apply the rules fairly and consistently. And in 15-5.2, the new situation states that a player dribbles the ball to a corner while the ball is within playing distance, key fact, uses his or her body to block the opponents from reaching the ball. And the ruling is this is legal, as this is shielding. Now keep in mind, it did not say that the player raised his or her arms and pushed somebody, because those are separate and different concepts that would change the situation. But if the ball is within playing distance and the player is just using his or her body between the ball and the opponent, that is a legal play. And that really isn't a change, but it takes a look at that language, and we're trying to reemphasize that. The next slide is going to talk about Rule 12.8.2D, which looks at serious foul play. And again, foul play is disqualified. A player commits a foul inside the penalty area while not attempting to play the ball, denying the opponent an obvious goal scoring opportunity, and the referee awards a penalty kick. This is looking at our rule change from a couple years ago that brought in the concept of when you are dismissed from the game, what we would call a send-off in some, a disqualification in ours, in our rule bodies. So keep in mind, the next screen's trying to illustrate this situation here. You can see our referee has his or her red card up, and you've got a situation there where there is no attempt to play the ball inside the penalty area. You're going to dismiss that person for denying an obvious goal scoring opportunity. They are going to play short at high school, and kind of go from there. Our next slide talks about the dual system, the dual and double dual corner kick officiating system. So, Tony, Delois, tell me, do you guys do a lot of two-person officiating systems there in Indiana?
Not in the high school level, no.
Okay, and certainly that's consistent. Yeah,
I think Trevino and Biggs, you guys do some two-man up there up north, don't you?
We do at the junior varsity level, but all attempts are made to have a three-man system at the varsity level.
So that's going to be consistent with what we do here in Kentucky as well. You know, we've actually set up our officiating fees where, regardless of whether you're doing a two-man or a three-man, it's the same fees for the school overall, because we didn't want to give a financial incentive for a school to only use two people. But we don't have a lot of that, but we do have certain areas that would probably be consistent with what Ben and Andrew are seeing. Sometimes you do have to do that. So what the committee was trying to look at here is, when you do that, there's some things you need to keep in consideration with the double dual and the dual system. And the previous slide, and you don't need to go back to that, tries to look at that concept and says when the ball is kicked from the right side, the lead official will take the position behind the ball in the corner flag. When the ball is kicked, the official will observe the flight of the ball, and once it's determined the ball will land in the field of play, the official can move inward along the goal line, so he or she can better observe the action of players. This is all talking about positioning. One of the challenges with doing a dual system is we find ourselves as referees often too far from play because we have to be able to make the transition down to the other side of the field to be in that critical positioning to determine whether it was a penalty kick, if there was a foul inside or outside, and then, you know, let's not forget about offside. two critical things that you need to be in position for to make those determinations. So this is trying to give a little guidance. You saw the play pick that kind of helps illustrate that as well. So that's really our editorial changes. Again, those are not rule changes per se, but they're just language that we kind of tweaked in the rule book that tried to help emphasize or to try to focus on some things. When we talk about emphasis, that's going to be the next section. The Rules Committee every year takes a look at specific situations that they feel require a special emphasis. And this year, one of the things that they looked at was correct field markings and appropriate uniforms. Again, this is an opportunity for me to tell you the committee is very concerned about the positions that we put referees in. When referees see uniforms that they don't like, when referees see fields that they don't like, and when they don't like them, I mean inconsistent with the rules. And we know that that puts a situation where the referee has to make a decision about how to handle things. Well, this is a point of emphasis that it's important that games that are played when on fields that are not marked according to the rules, or players are playing in uniforms that are not in accordance with the rules, it's important that you contact the state association. You're not going to not play the game in that situation unless you have a safety hazard, or if the uniforms are identical, obviously you're going to have to deal with something on that. Anything short of that, so long as you can safely continue to play, you're going to simply contact your referee assigner and make sure you contact the state association as you're kind of given that direction from Sandy, who I'm sure will give you detailed instructions along with the folks on the panelists here throughout the state that'll tell you what to do in those situations. We want to make sure that you think about a couple things. Make sure you tell the coach that you're going to call the state association on them. Don't let that come out of left field. And it's a simple conversation. Coach, your uniforms are not up to the rules right now. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be mean, but I have an obligation. The rules require me, Indiana requires me to report this back to the state association. Now I'm going to do that, but I want to make sure that you didn't get caught out of left field. The same thing with the field markings. And we're going to look a little bit about that in a second, because those are critical too. So when we look at this slide up on here, some of the most critical field markings that are not put in place are the team areas. And what happens when the team areas aren't marked in your games, Tony?
When the team,
Yeah.
I can say probably 90% of the schools do not have team areas marked. So,
Right. And what happens?
That's an obstacle.
Yeah. So when you get that situation is you have a coach that's running up and down the touch line, helping you call the game. And I know that there are a lot of challenges with that, but I will tell you what we've seen in Kentucky. And I think Kentucky and Kentucky and Indiana are pretty doggone similar in some of the facilities that we have. Indiana has some much bigger schools than Kentucky, but you guys have some more rural areas that are very consistent with the situation that we have as well. So I think we're very similar in that regard. I have yet to have a school that didn't have this reported, that they didn't work with us even on turf fields and use temporary markings or temporary paint to get this fixed. And what we saw is that it brought the coaches into a little bit of control. It kept people isolated to their areas. It brought a lot more order to the touch lines and made your job as officials easier. So keep in mind, that's a point of emphasis that the committee look for. I think that the state association will no doubt give you guys some different direction on how to handle this. And I think, you should defer to the state association and your referee coordinators or assigners as to how you handle that. The next point of emphasis is understanding the difference between fair, hard play and a foul. There's no doubt, we all know soccer is a contact sport, and understanding the differences between hard play and fair play in a foul that's reckless or even, endangering the safety of an opponent is critical. When a player acts with no disregard or no regard if there are consequences. If it's a reckless play, we all know that's another word for caution. You're going to caution that player, and that's not a bad thing. That's a warning to that player saying enough is enough. That's the bar. Do not go that high, or there's going to be consequences. The same thing if you use force that's disproportionate, if it's unnecessary, if it endangers the safety of an opponent. These are all things that are going to be looked at for serious foul play or even potentially violent conduct, depending on the circumstances. So, the committee is looking at the challenges of high school soccer. And one of the most common challenges that we see at state associations is the unfair, disproportionate force, the elevated force of the game as the game continues, because you as a referee maybe don't pick those moments in time where you can get control of the game and say, here's the bar, and we don't want to go too high. And again, it goes back to that whole art of communication. You have tools, you have whistles, you have whistle tone, you have the cards in your pocket. These are all tools to let the players know where the level is and what too high is in terms of force or recklessness. And so remember, this is a high school sports. This is education-based sports. And when we look at the collegiate level, we always talk about, these kids come out on the weekends and they play. Well, they got to be back in class on Monday. Well, it's the same thing in high school. These kids are first and foremost students. They're being educated, and we cannot have kids getting hurt on the soccer field and then not being able to go to school the next day. We've got to protect them. And part of that protection starts with you as a referee and being consistent with your foul identification and clearly communicating when it's gone too far and using the tools at your disposal. I mentioned the whistle and the whistle tone, and as it elevates in terms of the seriousness or the aggressiveness of the foul, elevating that tone is helpful to communicate that. And then when it's become reckless, you use the yellow card. And if it continues past that and you have something that's endangered the safety or been disproportionate in nature, that's when you unfortunately have to pull out the red card and you ask that player to no longer take part in the game. The next two slides, and I know one of them's already been put up, continues to talk about this situation. And the play pick we have up here, again, is talking about, that whole thing. And again, this play pick reminds us, again, talking as a group, doing our pregame, and making sure that we're all consistent, especially if you have a dual system where you need to be consistent with one another with what your foul identification is that day. And understanding that your foul identification one day may be different tomorrow. And there's some things that's okay. There's some things that could play a part in that. The level of play between the two teams, the disparity of talent between the two teams may adjust that foul identification and what's allowed. What's more important than anything is that you're keeping the kids safe and you're being consistent within the game. You'll have a much smoother game in that respects. Our next point of emphasis talks about education-based soccer. I've spent a lot of time today talking about the importance of education, why we want the kids to be able to go back to school tomorrow. I've also talked about how this is education-based athletics as opposed to the alternative. That's one of the reasons while the pregame meeting requires the coaches to be a part of that at the high school level. And this is a required meeting for both the head coaches and the captains, and they have to cover the pertinent rules, the sportsmanship, and the coin toss, and make sure that the coaches are verifying that the players are properly and legally equipped. This is a surefire way to start the game, as the play pick illustrates. This is an opportunity for you to start communicating with both teams and both coaches in a manner that will help you officiate the game, show that you're being fair, and that you're going out of your way to be equal to everybody. Because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing that the players want. They just want consistency, and they want you to be fair to them. And then hopefully you can allow the game to go on from there, and the right team wins. So really, that kind of wraps up everything that I had here today. The last slide that I hope Doug will put up will kind of give you some contact information. If for any reason you want to reach out to me and chat, my information is there on the screen. That first phone number is here in the office here in Kentucky. And that next number is my mobile phone. I know that might be a little unusual for someone to give it out, but everybody's already got the number anyhow, so it's okay that you can too. My email address is also up on the phone, and then our web address is up as well. I really appreciate Indiana allowing me to kind of come out and help out in this regard. It's a fun game. It's one of the most fun vocations you can ever do, being a part of the high school game and officiating, whether or not it's high school or college or whatnot. And I really appreciate Tony asking me to come and be a part of this. I hope that this has been a useful presentation for everybody. This should be very consistent with the PowerPoint that most likely you'll have as a part of your rules clinic that you'll have in the near future. But again, thank you everybody, and I hope everybody's had a chance to ask their questions and those have been responded. But I'm going to turn it back over to Tony and the rest of the panelists. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.
Chad, thank you very much. Very much appreciative for you to come up here and handle this. That was a great presentation for everybody, I think. I learned a few things about what's going on with the changes in high school. Ben, welcome. You have anything for to sound off here?
No, I just want to I jumped in kind of late, but I just want to say thanks to Chad. Just been a great resource for us here in Indiana, reaching over and helping out a bunch, and then everything you're doing with putting the rules guide up also for NYSOA. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Chad.
Abdu?
Thanks,
No?
Chad.
Thanks, Abdu. It's good to see you, buddy.
We have a
Good to see you, buddy. Thanks.
Q&A.
So, Doug, you wrap it up. Anything else?
We do have one question in the Q&A. When are the books going to be available on the
Yeah,
phone
so I
app?
can't answer with any clarity on that. I can tell you the rules books are out. If you can see the screen up here right now, that's what they're going to look at. They're a little different in color to what they have been in the past. So we do have the rule books. So what I will do is I'll get you that answer when the app will be available. I'll have to reach out to Teresa Wenz at the NFHS, but I will do that tomorrow morning. And I will make sure that our panelists here know the answer to that and they can disseminate that information. But I suspect that it'll be any day now if it's not already up.
Hey, Chad, can you show the back of that book? Is that due on it?
No.
No Abdu.
What the hell are you talking
I don't know how to read the book.
about? Me
So
too.
Indiana did get the books, Chad, and everybody that's listening. Sandra was supposed to be here tonight, and unfortunately she was called away. She had a meeting with her boss, Bobby Cox. But from my understanding, it looks like somebody did mention down there that they got the books today, and they're hoping to have those mailed out here in the next couple of weeks. So I hope that answers the question on
So I
that.
just wanted to say our next meeting is on the 29th of June at 7 o'clock. I think that is going to be virtual as well as live. More details will be forthcoming on that. So check your emails for that. Does anybody else have any other things?
Hey, Doug, somebody was asking about where they can go to get this on YouTube.
I will post it, try to post it tomorrow. There should probably not be any violations from the videos, so hopefully it will be up right away. And then I will distribute the link to Tony and Ben, and then you guys can forward it along to the other people. All the other videos are on our web or our YouTube channel, Never Ends Productions YouTube channel. All the meetings are there now. If you want to go back and look at them again, you can go to our page and you can find the other videos.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Anybody else have anything?
I just want to say, Chad, you exceeded Doug Ferguson's expectations, man. You did an awesome job.
Yes, you did, Chad.
You're even
Very
4
well.
minutes early.
Hey, he scared me to death last night, so.
You did have a little bit too much headroom on the video, but we'll work on it next time as we get started.
Wonderful.
No, thank you very much for joining us tonight. This is always good, and it's always hard to do when we're in such a weird time that we can't still get together properly and enjoy the things that we do when we're together. But this is maybe the next best thing, and it does give us an opportunity. You know, you're in Kentucky and we're here, so thank you very much for taking the time to share with us your expertise and all the rule changes.
Again, it's my pleasure.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. This is Doug Ferguson, Lana Ferguson, Everness Productions. We will see you next time.